Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2020-2021 Blaney Lecture with Adrian Matejka, presented by the Academy of American Poets. This lecture was created in memory of former Academy Board member Dr. Dorothy Gulbenkian Blaney by a gift from her estate. My name is Nikay Paredes, and I'm the Senior Programs Manager at the Academy of American Poets. For those of you who don't know us, we're the nation's leading champion of poets, poetry, and the work of poetry organizations. We also produce Poets.org, originated National Poetry Month, which is celebrated every April, and publish the popular Poem a Day series, among many other free programs and resources. Before I introduce Adrian Matejka, who will deliver this year's Blaney Lecture, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining this virtual event from Queens, New York, which is the traditional lands of the Munsee Lenape and Canarsie people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I'd also like to remind our audience members that a 20-minute Q&A session will follow this evening's lecture. You can submit your questions by clicking on the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen. Also, the chat will be open throughout this evening's program, and I thank everyone here for respecting your fellow audience members in the chat. This evening's lecture, titled Let's Stay Together, Notes about Black Poetry and Community, will be delivered by Adrian Matejka. He is the author of Somebody Else Sold the World from Penguin, forthcoming in July this year. He is also the author of Map to the Stars, which won the 2014 Anisfield Wolf Book Award and was a finalist for both the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize. Mixology, which won the 2008 National Poetry Series, and The Devil's Garden, which received the 2002 New York New England Book Award. He is also the author of the mixed media collaboration with Nicholas Galanin and Kevin Nieritter, Standing on the Verge, Maggot Brain, which is forthcoming from Third Man Books later this year, and of the graphic novel Last on His Feet, which is forthcoming from Liveright in 2022. Matejka's poetry is known for its inventive, often multidisciplinary exploration of identity and cultural history. The poet Rodney Jones writes, Adrian Matejka plays the language like a horn, with a cool inventiveness and bravura phrasing, yet his poems are as notable for their humanity as their flourishes and riffs at the borders of expression. He is the recipient of fellowships and awards from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Lannan Foundation, United States Artists, and the National Endowment for the Arts, among others. In 2019, he received an Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellowship. Through this fellowship, Matejka conducted workshops in Indiana cities with culturally diverse and economically underserved communities. He also launched the Inverse Poetry Archive, a digital archive that serves both as a historical document of poetry in Indiana and as a resource for teachers. Matejka currently teaches at Indiana University in Bloomington. Please welcome Adrian Matejka.
Peace, everybody. It's so good to be here with you tonight. Thank you for joining me in my living room in snowy Indianapolis. Just a warning, I've got two cats who may or may not make a guest appearance in my talk. They're both loud. You'll know it when you hear them. Thank you to Jen and to Nikay and Jeff and to the staff at the Academy of American Poets for giving me this opportunity to share some ideas at the Blaney Lecture. Thanks to the Blaney family for endowing this. And also thanks to Nikay for that great introduction. One last couple of thank yous to the ASL interpreters, Ryan and Bree, for the work they're already doing this evening. And finally, thanks to all of you for listening and for supporting Black poetry. I saw the list, or some of the list anyway, of people who were registered, and I was just over the moon to see so many friends and family. And I mean that literally. I have some actual family in the audience, my uncle and my cousin, maybe my mom if she was able to get her computer working. I wish we could all be here together doing this in the real world, but I'm grateful for the small things. It's serendipitous that 2021 is the 25th anniversary of Cave Canem. I hadn't realized we were about to reach such a milestone when I started writing this project back in September. For those of you who aren't familiar, you can read a significant exploration of Cave Canem's history and its goings on from one of the faculty members I was lucky enough to study with during my last year there, Kwame Dawes. It's posted on the Cave Canem website, and it's a fascinating historical document. What's about to follow here is definitely not that. It's more of a meditation on the way we build community and what community might be good for while we're out here in the wilderness. Because of revisionism aside, Black poetry stayed in the American wilderness in the 20th and early 21st century. We look back now and talk about the Harlem Renaissance as this major movement, and it was for Black people. The work that was being done by Langston Hughes, Gwendolyn B. Bennett, County Cullen, or Neil Hurston, you know the names. So many of them lifted up Black readers and Black community, even as they remained a curiosity for readers outside of our own community. We look back at the Black arts movement and Callaloo Literary Journal in the early years, and they were significant and vital for creating spaces for Black artists and writers, even as the white institutions and agencies remained nonplussed. The lack of consideration from the antagonists didn't stop Maury Evans or Etheridge Knight or Lucille Clifton or Wanda Coleman from doing the work they were doing with more grace than the scholars and institutions that were ignoring them. They found ways to create community from local need. They found ways to build zeitgeist from themselves and for others in the critical margins. I would like to add one small thing to the title of this. It's going to be, I called it 10 notes on Black community now because there are 10 of them and I'm just not very imaginative. I will not do the thing and name them as we go along, or number them rather, because for anybody who's been at the poetry reading where someone read a poem with sections and they number it, it can make the poem feel longer than it actually is. This should only take about 20 minutes. Hummin' Like Al Green. Just outside of Detroit, June 2002, and the wood-bossed corridors of the Cranbrook Academy of Art were not especially well lit. So when I stepped through that long walkway into the Kingswood Hall, it was as if someone opened up all the curtains on a bright Sunday. The Cave Canem Welcome Circle, right there, where poets, younger and elder, adorned, beautiful, and dangerous, were arranged elliptically in fold-out chairs. The bland lights flickering on that ceiling and then the sconces lining the walls didn't stand a chance. There were nearly 60 luminous Black poets in attendance. I recognized some of them from their author photos and a couple of others from readings or conferences. The intensity of all that lyricism was mesmerizing, their smiles assuring, and I didn't know how to act while being immersed in all of that Black splendor. Like many poets, I carried, and I still carry, a deep insecurity about language, about my poetic genealogy and history. I worry over whether or not the work I'm trying to do is legible and sustainable. So to be in the same room with poets I'd been borrowing from for years was exhilarating and profoundly exhausting. These details might not seem significant, but they are to me. Those lights again, with their unfocused but expansive halos, like the smudged ring around a lamp in the backdrop of a Polaroid. The ornate wood, ubiquitous as music. The sounds of the room too settling like music as we each found a seat in that egalitarian circle. Who imagined such acoustics? The feeling that I myself was unfolding and expanding, and if I continued to swell, that chair I was sitting in might just not be able to hold me at all. This is what community can feel like. All of this and the internal arpeggio of belonging. Protest and homily. Here's some history. Toy Derricott and Cornelius Eady built Cave Canem from the music of the many writers of the Black diaspora, but also from their need. They had done the tough megaphone work alone on the dais, the protest work in abandoned attics, the kind of rough-knuckled work necessary to make a variance of poetry that can be shouted in an empty street and still be revolutionary or homily. I wasn't there for those foundational movements in physical form, but I was there with a deep need for it the entire time they were building. I was solo in the middle of an Indianapolis suburb, the lingering history of marginalization in every book I was assigned in high school. Sharing the truth is the most unfeathered, incendiary poetry. Cave Canem faculty Nikki Finney taught me that under the right auspices, poetry can be a bright freedom narrative. Yusuf Komunyakaa taught me that Black poetry can be a manifesto against our corrupt government and its 10-eared systems. Marilyn Nelson taught me that history is never what they tell you if you approach it with wisdom. Over a snack at 2 a.m, Al Young taught me to straighten up and play from the gut. Elizabeth Alexander sent me spinning with a brand new catalog of You Better Get It in Your Soul. So many possibilities in poetry and prose for Black writers, and we're able to be us because of those who came before us. Mnemonics of isolation. I'm thinking about Cave Canem and that long ago radical writing retreat right now for many reasons, not the least of which is pandemic loneliness. Writing alone for nearly a year reminds me of my undergraduate study, during which I never took a workshop or a writing seminar with another Black student, and certainly not with a Black poet leading the discussion. I was an oasis without the requisite palm tree and blue water for the thirsty traveler. I was a blue dot on someone else's interstellar photo. I'm mixing metaphors here because neither of them seem to address the fluidity of identity and how isolating it can be when none of your own metaphors fit neatly. I'm thinking about all of this now, in 2021, back home in Indiana again, as my neighbors still goose-step masklessly under their billowing flags of racism. And at the same time, others climb the US Capitol walls before spilling into those marbled halls, epithets where their mouths should be. The insurrectionists were high-fiving each other between chants in the Great Rotunda. Meanwhile, my team can't dap each other, can't give each other a pound or a real-time what's up unless it's on a screen. The flip, slip, grip, then ha-ha of handshakes is only a line in my notebook now, not a held memory. The tenuous head nod on the way to the basketball court is fading too, and now I can't smell the hardwood or remember the collective sound everyone makes after some scrub gets shook by a crossover. Somebody else is out there pretending to be Calbert Cheaney, draining left-handed threes in the habit of an IU great. All of this in the absence of Chad's encounters. We're solo in the gym and the rim has no net at all. The ball needs inflating. What I've learned during this pandemic is isolation inspires nostalgia, and nostalgia evokes even more significant need for fellowship with my writing community in the way that Cave Canem afforded me so long ago. Like many Americans, I'm part of too many communities and identities to be clear-eyed about any of them. At the same time, identity and community are front row in contemporary poetry. Some of my communities are chosen for me by racists and typecasters in airport security and grocery store clerks. Others are simply autobiographical facts. I'm a Black man, but I was raised by my white mother. I sometimes write about urban landscapes, but I'm from a more agrarian Midwest. I was born into a soundtrack of jazz and funk, but I raised myself up on rap cassettes I got as third-generation dubs from my friend Che's cousin who lived in the Bronx. That's the only way you could get rap in Indianapolis back then. To be a poet is to necessarily be generations away from the big world of days, while also dreaming of momentary, visceral connections of community, line by line, image by image. I can feel the distance like a sickness I haven't gotten yet. A white poet says it out loud, because you know they do that kind of thing. A while back, I did a talk for Cave Canem in Brooklyn about poetry and stand-up comedy. The talk was open to anyone who was interested, and we chopped it up about Dave Chappelle, Moms Mabley, and Richard Pryor. After, a white poet approached me and challenged the exclusivity of the Cave Canem retreat. Why can't I attend Cave Canem? Excluding white people is another form of racism, she said. That entitlement, that belief that even the languages and gestures of Black folks are the purview of whiteness is as built into the poetry community as it is into America itself. It's what allows some white poets to imagine that they can take a nom de plume from another cultural community and still make it into the pages of best American poetry. It's what allows some white poets to write in blackface and be confused by the backlash. If you don't understand what I'm doing, you're not the audience, is a familiar diminishing dismissal by those poets. This might not seem like it's about community, but it is. When there's no acknowledgement of a culture and its artistry, some opportunistic somebody will try to claim it. James Weldon Johnson, and there's the Harlem Renaissance again, said the final measure of greatness of all peoples is the amount and standard of literature and art that they have produced. The Black Arts Movement made that greatness plain for all to see. Kalu, Cave Canem, the Darkroom Collective, the Black Took Collective have all continued to build on the amount and standard. I haven't even talked about the performance community's most diverse group of poets probably ever. Black, brown, everybody standing tall in the habits of poetry. Together, they've made it tougher to heist the community's stories and signifiers under the auspices of art. It's about the physiology of colonialism as much as it is about the psychology. The sweet science. The science of community is simple, even if the psychology of it is not. We need to be around people for our poetry and for ourselves. Our bodies respond to pheromones and they activate serotonin. We get addicted to those serotonin stimulations and their requisite sonnets of flashback and want, and then we call it love. We need those pheromones when they're gone and call it being lovesick. No, we need those hips and gestures and memories and call it lovesick. Technically, we are sick. When a cherished friend or partner is absent, our bodies go through withdrawal. No pheromones, no serotonin, no mornings lingering in the coffee steam. Being a poet in the wilderness or in a pandemic is a little like being lovesick. Poets need other poets, either on the page or in the world, in order to be our best selves. Poets need community in order to engage with and activate their visions and ideas. Thoreau acted like he was solo in the pond, but in fact, a freed slave, Zalaf White, was his neighbor. The myth of the monolithic writer is more about exclusion than empowerment. Are y'all doing okay? Is this all right? Will you be able to manage it? Anybody need to stop and get a snack or a libation or something like that? All right, then I'm gonna keep it moving then, because that was number 5 of these sections. The institution and our heroes. In 2006, I was part of a reading at the Gwendolyn Brooks Conference at Chicago State University. Some of my friends and heroes were participants, among them Patricia Spears Jones and Patricia Smith, Frank X. Walker and Marilyn Nelson, Lynn Thompson and Major Jackson, Lillian Yvonne Bertram and Quincy True. Everyone in attendance recognized that we were sharing words in the shadow of Ms. Brooks and brought it accordingly. That day, Patricia Smith read from the manuscript that would become her National Book Award finalist collection, Blood Dazzler, which inspired me to finally start writing poems for the Big Smoke. It was the way she scaffolded history and its attendant memories that pushed me out of my research and into the long haul of monologue. One night after a reading, a few of us were hanging out at a hotel bar while a dude with a jerry curl sang covers of the Commodores and Al Green. And those who were there still remember this. I know they do, because it was extraordinary. He was accompanied by a keyboard player and a guitarist, and they were all wearing sunglasses. Of course, he sang Let's Stay Together. And of course, we tried to harmonize with him in the habit of poets. We created a third space between that lounge singer, Al Green's Magnificent, and our suspect poetry keys. Somewhere between the song, Patricia Spears Jones made the point, and I'm paraphrasing, that younger Black poets didn't understand what it was like before Cave Canem. And without meaning to, she gave me the idea that started this lecture. I just want to pause for a second, because when I started working on this, I wanted to write a piece, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, about the Black women who inspired me as writers. And I wanted to focus specifically on Patricia Smith and Patricia Spears Jones and Allison Joseph. And I interviewed them, and the interviews were stunning, and they were so much better than anything that I was going to do with them. So I've decided that I've got to talk to Patricia about it. But my plan is to publish the interviews themselves so people can hear their words, which were so much more significant than mine. So thank you for that, Patricia Smith. Thank you for that, Patricia Spears Jones. The poetry of place. And nearly all of us are writing in seclusion now, working through variations of what it means to be a cappella without a chorus, what the audience looks like in an empty room. Kaveh Khanam was about finding the audience I never knew I was looking for, primarily because that audience seemed impossible in the 1990s. Of course, I was always going to be one of the only ones in my little literary terrarium because there could only be one back then. Like the three Black poets who had won the Pulitzer Prize back then: Gwendolyn Brooks, Rita Dove, and Yusef Komunyakaa. Of course, I had to write my way through whiteness, even though I didn't know the name for it yet. Of course, writing is a lonely art made even lonelier by his homogeneity. That's the American way, whether in Chicago or in the suburbs of Indianapolis. When I was a kid in Indy, we used to go on the same sorry field trip every year to the James Whitcomb Riley Museum Home. And that's the name, James Whitcomb Riley Museum Home. I don't remember anything about those trips or the poetry they talked about, except that everything in the home seemed like an antique. The furniture, the leather books with their resplendent gold pages, the words themselves. That historic house was the only lasting testament to literature in Indianapolis back then. Now there's a black and white mural of James Whitcomb Riley wearing a top hat off of Michigan Street. His glasses are attached to his waistcoat with an ornate chain. There's a mural of Kurt Vonnegut smiling in a rumpled trench coat on one end of Massachusetts Avenue, a street that cuts through my city's cultural areas. Placing the mural there makes sense because Vonnegut once said, "All my jokes are Indianapolis, all my attitudes are Indianapolis." But on the other end of that Massachusetts Avenue is a mural of Mari Evans, resplendent artist, enabler of Black voices in poetry, prose, and beyond. She started out as a jazz musician. In that image, and now, I wish I had made this a multimedia presentation so you could see it, but you can look it up online. It's incredible. Just search Mari Evans mural. I'm sure it's the first thing that comes up. In the image, she looks like she's heard this part of the story before, the one where a Black woman does immeasurable amounts of cultural work without getting any support or credit until much later. Hello, Gwendolyn Brooks. Hello, Lucille Clifton. Hello, June Jordan. People outside of this city most likely know Kurt Vonnegut, and they may have a vague memory of James Whitcomb Riley. But those of us in the city, those of us from the city, know Mari Evans is the poet of Indianapolis. She, along with Etheridge Knight, are the real foundation of poetry in the Circle City. They built poetry communities even as they built poetry constituencies. In a lot of ways, Black poetry in Indianapolis is a microcosm of Black poetry in America. The first collection of poetry written by a Black poet is Phyllis Wheatley's Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral. I should say Black American poet. And it includes the poem on being brought from Africa to America. If you're not familiar with the poem is lensed through the gaze of the enslavers. Some view our sable race with a scornful eye, she says. Their color is a diabolical dye. And here's a Black woman doing the ear and heart work that racists of her time refused to imagine was possible. She wasn't writing in conversation as much as she was trying to create conversation. What else could she do in those times of chattel and murder while she used poetry to define herself? There was nobody for her to have a conversation with, even if she was allowed to do so. She did have some discussions with Black abolitionists, though, which I imagine made a very different kind of poetry. It's frustrating to be the first. It's exhausting to be lonely and to be the only. Mari Evans' extraordinary poem, I Am a Black Woman, was published almost exactly 200 years after Phyllis Wheatley's on being brought from Africa to America. And Miss Evans shifts the lens. This is part of the poem. I am a Black woman, tall as a cypress, strong beyond all definition, still defying place and time and circumstance. Ms. Mari wasn't the only Black woman in Indianapolis, obviously, but she wrote for those women who felt like they were the only ones, and maybe for those who felt like nobody wanted to hear their voices. In absence of immediate, tangible community, there can be a community of commiseration. There can be a community of words that defies space and time and circumstance. Third space and its inhabitants. Mari Evans, I'm a Black woman, makes me think of Homi K. Bhabha's idea of third space communication from the location of culture. In the way he put it, individual cultures have individual communicative patterns, and those patterns across communities don't line up. We can't communicate directly. Instead, we stumble around, antagonize and fetishize, then finally create a third communicative space for conversation. Baba's ideas aren't unique in therapy circles, but they are in poetry. Poets dialogue with conflicting cues and habits, especially in this time of masks and distances. We can't even communicate with the person standing in front of us at the grocery store, let alone a poet in Argentina or a musician in New Mexico. It reminds me of something Miles Davis once said. If you understood everything I said, you'd be me. Let me say that again, because it's worth thinking about. If you understood everything I said, you'd be me. This is where poetry becomes the poetry of community. No matter how much some poets try to deconstruct or reconstruct, poetry is in fact about communication. It's about conveying ideas, music, and imagery to our perceived or imagined audiences, and they may or may not recognize the cues we desire them to. By its nature, as an artistic construct, poetry is already a third space of communication, not for the poet, not for the audience, but part of both. Poetry works the same way Baba describes, only without the power dynamics. The real challenge, the challenge for Black poets especially, is the complications of our voices, the lack of amplification of our voices, the historical lack of institutional support for our voices. My heroes. I'm thinking about all of this because I wanted to use this talk to examine some of the Black women whose poetry inspired me and who've worked outside the familiar communities. And I was using the Black arts movement as one part of it and Cave Canem as the other part of that framework. So this would include Wanda Coleman and I, for example, Lucille Clifton, Elizabeth Alexander and Patricia Smith, Allison Joseph and Patricia Spears Jones. There are so many poets who might fit in here, including Black male poets like Melvin Dixon and Jay Wright. But I'm also thinking locally about Mari Evans and the way she was not as vocally or materially supported here in Indianapolis as Etheridge Knight was. I'm thinking about the way that Black women create spaces for everybody else, but are so rarely offered that same space in return. I'm also thinking about the physical and emotional exhaustion that comes from creating the spaces I've been talking about. I spent most of my time as poet laureate, and Nikai mentioned this, working on 2 projects, creating a series of movable community workshops for people in underserved communities that were actually based on Poetry for the People workshops from June Jordan that later on Etheridge Knight adopted in Indianapolis too. And also building an archive of Indiana poetry at the Indiana State Library. And I had so much help when I was doing this work. I couldn't be more grateful for the support I got from the Indiana Humanities and the Indiana Arts Commission, the library, the Academy of American Poets, and the Center for Black Literature and Culture at the Indiana Downtown Library. Anybody who comes to visit Indianapolis, you got to check out the Center for Black Lit. It is a extraordinary place. Just a whole wing of the library full of poetry from the Black diaspora, cookbooks and literature and everything. It's such a beautiful space to be. But even with all the help and the resources I was provided, the work was exhausting, man. I had no energy day to day for my own poems because the work that I was doing to create these spaces was coming from the same body places my poems come from. So to do that work, to give the self with the vitality and relentlessness that Toy and Cornelius have done year after year is unimaginable to me. I could barely make it for 2 years doing that kind of work. So I hope that this is a talk of praise as much as it is a talk that examines the ways we think about community inside and outside of our institutions. The give back of resources and support, which is always often loudly talked about, that doesn't always exist. And the unsayable fact is institutions, even the most well-meaning, are exclusive by their existence. And none of them have the resources necessary to support everybody. And there isn't enough room at the party for everybody in any moment. Somebody always gets left outside. And too often in American poetry, that somebody has been Black women. So this is the last part of this. Last questions and deuces. One of the things missing from poetry and America at large is a more capacious community of transcendence. A community that preferences the artisan's well-being over the commerce of the art. In Indiana, we had Lyle Station, a community built by free blacks on land they purchased in the 1840s that was welcome to everybody. It wasn't a utopia, but it had utopian habits. We know that the name of Lyle Station and the history, even now, as the town is no longer a town, but it's just called an unincorporated community. Unincorporation isn't a bad thing. What about the people who protected each other from lynch mobs and random violences in this complicated state, and we don't even know their names? What about the unnamed people who took care of each other then and now because the government and its other institutions are unwilling to do so? It's only a small shuffle from the biography of uplift to the enactment of it. That's especially true in poetry. Right now, there are more poets from the Black diaspora writing in apartments and offices and church pews and apple orchards than any time before. How are we going to continue to enact this stuff for them? How are we going to create inclusive spaces for them when the spaces have already been repurposed in ways that never considered the acoustics or the lighting for Black people? I'm thinking about that cover band again long ago in Chicago with Patricia and Frank singing with my whole heart. Singing along with Al Green is a start, but only if you can hum like he does. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Adrian. At this point, I'll invite our audience members to submit questions for the Q&A. I see we already have a queue forming up, but if you want to ask a question, please click on the Ask a Question link at the bottom of your screen. If you don't have a question, you can definitely vote for other audience members' questions. So I guess we can start, Adrian. Are you ready?
Yeah.
I'm going to read the top voted one first. Someone is asking, hello, Adrian, would you please spend some time sharing your thoughts on the value or challenge to discussing the genesis and crafting of poetry or its composition?
Okay, so if I'm understanding the question, right, we want to talk about how poetry starts on the page and in the community. Am I understanding that right? I hope so, because it sounds like that's a beautiful question. You know, I mean, I think all poetry starts from the body. You know, it comes straight from the middle and finds its way out. The trick is trying to figure out how to harness that energy and what kind of language that you need to frame how you feel in that moment, right? I had a beautiful teacher, Allison Joseph, who I mentioned briefly in my talk, who told me that there are poems everywhere. You just need to know how to see them. And I've come to understand that as being, there are all kinds of opportunities for expression, but myself and my vision for the world needs to line up with what I'm looking at. Not everybody can be Pablo Neruda and write a poem about a salt shaker. But I feel like a lot of us can find our way to writing a poem about the frustrations we might feel as they are enacted around us. I mean, I can't figure out how to write a poem yet, but watching those people scaling the Capitol walls with their sort of paramilitary gear and their racism flags, there's a poem there waiting to happen. I just can't figure out the language. I feel it inside of me, but I can't figure out how to write it yet. So I think maybe it's like that, right? Something inspires us, we feel it here, and when those two things meet, that's when the poem happens.
Thank you. Second question, what advice would you give to someone who is a Black poet but doesn't feel a part of any, and it's in quotes, community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that feeling well. I'm very intimately familiar with that feeling of not being connected. And I think one of the problems, or one of the challenges for Black poets, and readers of Black poetry too, is to let go of the idea that there's a kind of poetry that we could call Black poems, right? The diaspora is enormous, it's capacious, and there are all these different versions of the Black experience to write about. And so for someone who doesn't feel connected to community, I feel like this is an opportunity to start to write about your own experience and to write about the way that you're seeing you're seeing the world through your point of view and your perspective. And always read. I mean, I think we always talk about this. I think every poet it gives the advice to read, but I'm telling you, you'll be surprised at the various kinds of community you'll find inside of books. I learned more about myself reading. I'm going to give you a few examples. When I read Blood Dazzler from Patricia Smith, when I was talking about earlier, I learned more about myself than I ever thought I could, even though this is a book about Hurricane Katrina coming into New Orleans in the aftermath. I don't know anything about that. I wasn't there, but just the human experience of it, I learned so much. And so I think that, when I was younger, I spent a lot of time tracking down Black poetry. I was reading Langston Hughes, and it was still one of my favorites. Robert Hayden, and I mentioned Yusef Komunyakaa and Gwendolyn Brooks. All of these people who were so inspiring to me, and that was one version of my education. And then there was Sylvia Plath and Elizabeth Bishop, and there was Pablo Neruda, who I mentioned earlier. There was a whole other version of it that had nothing to do at all with being a Black person on this planet. And I learned a different thing from that. And so somewhere between all of those reading experiences, I was able to find the community that I was looking for, at least what tided me over until I found Kaveh Khanum and other writers of that ilk. So I hope that helps a little bit. Start with your story and then build out.
Thanks for answering that question, Adrian. We also have a question about your work specifically. Someone is asking, are the letters from Hattie to Belle in The Big Smoke based on real letters? What inspired you to write persona? And then there's a second part to that question. What inspired you to write persona poems about Jack Johnson?
Yeah, so that's a great question. They're not real. But the events inside of them are. That's one of the things I tried to stick with when I wrote The Big Smoke, is I tried to make it so that everything that happens in the book actually happened except for the shadow poems. That's the only thing that's completely made up. So these conversations and the ideas expressed in those letters were actually expressed, but they weren't written as letters. It was just something that I wanted to do to try to create a framework for Hattie, so she had her own space in the book, if that makes sense. So for those who aren't familiar with this book, there are 3 different women who speak in the book, Jack Johnson's wife and his 2 mistresses. And so each of them has a unique formal construction, inside of the book to create a geography for them, right? And so the letters were one of them. I'm really fascinated with epistolary poems anyway, so it was a chance for me to work through that. As far as Jack Johnson goes, wanting to write about him, I mean, I just think he's a beautiful and complicated and very complicated person. And so I thought I was just going to write an essay about boxing and about learning about it with my mother when I was a kid. And she used to talk about Jack Johnson all the time. And so when I started to research him, it became really clear that this dude wasn't a small part of an essay. He was supposed to be something much more, it needed to be a grander scale to manage his grandiosity. So an essay turned into a few poems turned into a book. And it all started after I heard Patricia read from her collection.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking that.
Yeah, great questions. Okay, I guess the next question I'm going to read out is, can you tell us your reaction to Amanda Gorman's inauguration poem and all the attention she has brought to poetry, and particularly to Black poets?
Yeah, I was in awe of this young woman's poem and her poise. It was just an extraordinary thing to see. When she came in and she burned the spot down, I was really, I'm a great admirer of previous inaugural poets, Elizabeth Alexander and Richard Blanco, were both the inaugural poets for President Obama, and they were amazing. And and they were also in their mid-career too, right? So I'm thinking about people who are older, people who've been doing this for a long time and have been in a lot of situations, and they rocked it. And I know it was hard for them, and they rocked it. But to see somebody who's 22 years old, that gifted, and just came in there with the people's elbow on everybody, I was just, whew, is incredible. And then she turned around and did this business for the Super Bowl too. I mean, I think what sometimes gets twisted is that poetry is not something, it's not something that's from antiquity. It's not something that, it ends up in those leather-bound, well, it doesn't, but it's not only in those leather-bound books that I used to see in those tours when I was a kid. It's something that's living and vital, and the practitioners of it are from like 9 years old, 8 years old, all the way up to 108. And so to see a young poet go up there and burn it down like that, I was so happy. I was just, I don't know her, so I don't have the right. I have no relationship with her, so I don't have the right to be proud of her. She did all this work on her own, but I was so proud to see a poet doing that, if that makes sense. Like from a distance, I was just so proud to see poetry represented that way. Yeah.
Thanks for answering that one. And I guess we have so many questions, like there are 30 on the queue now, but we're kind of running against time. So maybe I'll bring us home with this short, but I think beautiful question. When did you discover your passion for poetry?
That's a really wonderful question. Honestly, I discover it every day. Every time I pick up a poem, at least the poems that move me, I'm reminded all over again what a beautiful art this is. I think a lot of people have these great origin stories in poetry, and mine isn't that great. I wanted to be a rapper, and I was really bad at it. Like I've got some friends in the poetry world, like Nate Marshall, who's this great poet and also an MC, and I'm like, what are you doing? How are you able to do both of these things? I couldn't rap, but I liked the language. I liked the wordplay. And when I went to college, I was exposed to, in the best way, Yusef Komunyakaa. He read this poem, and it sounded like music to me. And that was the beginning and the end of it. As soon as I heard him read, I knew whatever that is, I want to do what he did. And I was 19 years old. Yeah.
All right. I guess, if there's anything else you want to shout out, Adrian, I know you have like a couple books forthcoming, a few.
Yeah. So, I'm not good at the self-promotion, but there are a lot of really good books coming out this year. So, this is a great year to buy poetry and to support poets, because we all need it. We all got to eat. But there are a lot of people who I wish, if I'd had thought about it, I would have made a list, because I know that there are several really brilliant books coming out. Aaron Ballou has a book coming out. Alex Dimitrov's book is out. There are a few people who, and I know I'm forgetting a ton of people. So rather than to forget somebody and feel bad about it, I'll just say, go buy poetry books. Everybody, buy the books.
Great. So yeah, thank you so much, Adrian. I'd also like to thank our ASL interpreters this evening, Ryan and Bree. Thank you so much for your work. And thank you everyone who joined us here tonight for the Blaney Lecture with Adrian Matejka, presented by the Academy of American Poets. A version of this evening's lecture will be published in the spring-summer issue of American Poets magazine, which is the exclusive benefit of the Academy's membership program. To become a member and to learn more about how you can support our free programs that champion poets and promote the appreciation of poetry, please visit Poets.org/membership. And that concludes our talk.
Thank you, Nakai. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening.
All right.
Appreciate
Bye, everyone.